Hey everybody, we're waiting for Nicole Kolenda from the NYU Motor Speech Lab to join us. We're going to talk about target selection. We talked a lot about target selection for childhood apraxia of speech. Gosh, I think like a couple weeks ago, maybe. There she is. In terms of phrases. Hold on, make sure, okay, there we go. Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. A little frazzled. Like today has been a day, I'm telling you. I'm just glad I made it back home on time to be here with you.
Yes, I am too.
Well, thanks for doing this again. We got really good feedback. We talked, has it been like 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe? I can't keep track of time. 3.
I don't know. 3.
Yeah. Somewhere along there. Anyway, within the last month or so.
Yes.
But we had you on to kind of talk us through a framework when we're talking about target selection, basically, right? Like thinking of what we're going to target in therapy for our kids who have childhood apraxia of speech. And I know we had fun and we got good feedback. So I was like, let's do this again. So we're doing it again. And I put a story out there with a question box asking people, what do you want us to talk about again if we do it again? And a few people mentioned, like, what about longer utterances? What about when you have those kids where it's like, okay, we're beyond just like these single word targets. Where do we go after that? And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
And I'm actually really excited to talk about this because it's when we think about apraxia and how it presents. Turkey is here, wonderful. It's a spectrum. And we know that. And those of us who are treating this population, we see it as a spectrum, right? We know that there are kids who are more profoundly impacted and are really struggling at the single word level. What's up, Jersey? Latvia.
Anyway, wow.
Amazing. And then we have these other kids who, just have more skill at this time, and they're speaking more with phrases or more complex word structures. And obviously treating these kids who fall under the umbrella or the diagnosis of CAS, it's going to look differently how we pick our targets for these kids, right? And something we're excited about at the NYU Motor Speech Lab and at the CAS Speech Lab is looking at phrases in therapy. And we're hoping to be able to look at this more formally going forward. So I'm just throwing that out there, that this is something that we have explored in our current research right now. We do have data to back it up, but we are looking to do it a bit more formally. So
I love that. That's great.
I guess to step back a little bit is that if you've been feeling like you have a kid that you're working with that has CAS, but that would really benefit from a little bit more of a complex target, your feelings are accurate and are probably right? So we wanted to have just a little conversation about that because it's not, I almost feel like, and Amy, I could be wrong, I feel like the focus has been really on single words with these kids. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think especially, and granted, I'm at that point with a lot of my kids, or at least initially, we're working on those, we're looking at syllable shapes, we're looking at complexity, we're looking at different vowels and different, just things to target when it comes to maybe our younger kids or more severe kids.
Right.
But you're right. I think the struggle is, and just speaking from like a typical SLP who may not specialize in apraxia, I think we tend to think along these lines of, it's hard to get away from that traditional articulation approach where we think of, okay, we're working on a word. I get that we're working on words. So now do we just practice words in sentences? Is that what we're really doing in order to get more complex? So what would you say to that person, that SLP?
No, because really what I want you to be thinking about is that it's not really 2 to 3 words, but really a syllable sequence.
That's a great way to put it.
Almost in the way that we think about banana, as a multisyllabic word, when we're thinking about using phrasal targets, we're really thinking about this as syllables and making it more complex. And it may be that you were working with a child that progressed in treatment and you're sort of shape shifting with them, which is amazing, right? Or this child is new to your caseload and you're really doing your due diligence and trying to figure out where they are and you want to meet them where they're at. So I think that as it all goes down to a really good assessment, and if I can for a second, I guess talk about what this child who needs phrases, what they're going to look like in assessment, right? So you're probably going to hear or notice distorted vowels, trouble with some consonants, right? I think that you're going to see that most likely on all of your assessment tasks. That's most likely why they're coming to you in the first place. So you're going to be doing your Goldman Fristo. We really love the DEMS, the dynamic evaluation of motor speech skills at our lab, developed by Dr. Edith Strand. Side note, it really is the only dynamic assessment on the market, which means it allows you to have a back and forth with the child, with the target, to see how they respond to multisensory cueing. Super helpful. You're going to see those increased errors with those multisyllabic words and the longer output of those phrases, right? So you're going to be hearing that. So they might sound okay at the single word level. On the GFTA, they might even appear more phono-based. You will hear a lot of those phonological patterns that you're familiar with, let's say, gliding, vowelization, cluster reduction, right? But when you test further, like let's say you do a teapot, or in the self, you're doing the formulated sentences, or you're doing your connected speech sample, which you must do your due diligence and do all of this to get all the information you can to get the right approach, then you're going to really start to notice more errors.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I think lastly, something that we think about with these kids who have more output is the grammatical morphemes. So maybe if we think about the self, maybe in the word structure subtest, they're using those grammatical elements, that progressive ing or maybe the past ed, and they have them okay. But when we hear them talk in phrases or little sentences, they omit these elements. So this is the profile that I want you to be thinking about of when to think, okay, I need to create targets that are more challenging. At the end of the day, we're working on the efficiency of the motor planning system, okay? So then we go back to what we were talking about before is, in theory, phrases are just more complicated syllable sequences.
I love that. I think, again, just to put it out there for SLPs, it's a paradigm shift for us, right?
Yeah.
We're used to thinking sounds. And so when we think, okay, we got to target this sound, we're going to target it in a word and then a phrase and a sentence. And so it's like, okay, those are ways to distinguish linguistically what we're doing. But in terms of movement, what we're doing is think of syllable sequences, right? So, if you're using it might be you're at that 3 to 4 syllable range, but do you have to work on encyclopedia or cucumber or computer if it's not relevant to the child and, not something that's going to be motivating to address? Or should we consider what are some common phrases? That's another question too, that maybe we can talk in. How do you determine what phrases that you target with your particular kids on your caseload?
So I actually pulled some phrases from some of the kids we had, just so I could be really speaking from really some that I've used, because again, we are still doing our due diligence and figuring out what the kid likes, what's important to the family. We want to have targets that are meaningful, right? Like this is really something we have to consider. And again, how do we do that? We have to get to know these kids a little bit and, talk to them about what their interests are. So one of my favorite kids that I worked with loved basketball. And a couple of our target phrases centered around playing basketball, or one of them like good shot. And if we take good shot, for example, one of the things we want to be considering with that is the transition from the end of the first word, good, right, to the beginning of the second word. And we call that, the boundaries across the words. So good shot is complicated versus like go home. Going from that vowel to that, the initial continuant H and home is easier, let's say. Right. And then if we think about a target like count me in or point it out, let's say, we talked about this at our talk, point it out, right? If we think about a target like that, what we notice is that the unstressed words in this phrase have a tendency of getting dropped. So in this instance, it would probably get dropped, right, for a kid that's struggling. So we're really thinking about what that transition could look like and then how we can support them. That's how we think about our targets, right? And or like something like you want to have that ing, I'm going. Again, has that contraction, I'm going. The to the g, that's a pretty hard transition. And we have the grammatical morphemes that are challenging, right? So these are the things that you want to be considering when you're working with these kids and picking your phrasal targets. Well, and that's a great point too, bringing up the naturalness of how we're actually going to teach it. Because I think sometimes we think of common phrases and we read them and they're all spelled out nicely. And then I think of one that I was working with a child and even like regional differences, like we were working on, I want it. And so mom had been working on it and it was really, she had worked on it without me knowing about it, how it's spelled. I want it, right? And it's like, okay. But when like regionally speaking here, now there are some places probably, maybe even East Coast are like, you might pronounce that T somewhere, but here we don't. I want it. That's what I say. I want it. Or some people might say, I want it. And then almost have a glottal stop at the end of the phrase. So it's like thinking through those phrases. And like, I know Jenny Burm talks about this all the time, like say it to yourself maybe 10, 20 times. Record yourself saying it. Look back at yourself saying it. How do you say it naturally, not how it's spelled? Well, I've gotten into trouble with this, with like a word like banana, which I happen to, if it's appropriate, I think it's a really good word, right? It's a really good, more complex syllable structure for a child that maybe doesn't have any 3-syllable words at all, right? Banana. Right. If they like banana, if they, you'll figure all that out. But I like using banana, CV. But how do we say banana? It's not banana. Sometimes I'll just be like banana. It's just like, right? Banana, because that's how you say it. And we have to be careful then when we prompt for it, because it's not equal stress. Right. So it's the same kind of thing where on paper, it looks a certain way, but then how do we actually say it? Right. Lots of really good phrases, though, that could happen. My turn, your turn, go fish, right? If you're playing go fish. I'm tired, right? Like, I don't know, so many good things that you can work on, but just with the idea that we're working on the efficiency of the motor plan. Right. I love that. Yeah, we were working, I'm trying to think of some phrases that I was working on with one of my kids, and I had just teaching it, you almost like I caught myself in the moment, like, okay, let's fix the prosodic aspect of what I'm working on, because, and I wish I know what it was spaghetti, and she wanted to work on, and it wasn't a phrase, but it was a complicated word. Right? And granted, the reason we chose it is because
we were doing online therapy at the time, and I could hear mom cooking in the kitchen, and she was saying she was cooking spaghetti, except it came out steady was how she said it. And I'm like, okay, well, you have spaghetti. You eat a lot. You eat that a lot. It's one of her favorite things. It's a great target word, right?
Yeah.
So I was steady. I'm like, okay, well, she's forgetting the spa. I wanted to get spa, get that cluster in there. So we chained it. Like, let's change spa. And then as we were practicing it, I hear myself, we were doing spaghetti. It's like, oh shoot. Now I got the emphasis in the wrong spot. And then, but in the moment, you can kind of catch it and fix it. All right, we need to put the emphasis on get, right? Spaghetti. Yeah. And I was like, gestural cues, visual cues, and which is my next question too. Like, when you're cueing kids for those longer utterances, are there particular cues? I mean, I'm tending to use DTTC with my kids as we're working up and down that hierarchy. But I think if you're working specifically on stress and emphasis, are there particular strategies that you use for that?
I do. I actually, couldn't be used virtually. This one I'm going to say, you were in person. If it's spaghetti, if they're okay with it, which I've probably already figured out that they are, and this is why I'm doing it. I'm talking about, with touching and therapy, all types of touching. I don't just mean prompt. I mean tactile cueing, right? All of it. And remember, we do use prompt in DTTC. Of course, it can be beautiful cueing. But I like to use pressure for where the stress is. So I'll sometimes spaghetti squeeze their arm on where we have the stress, so that they could really feel it. And I'll show them that, right? And I love spaghetti for that kid is so relevant. And to your point, I do a lot of screenings on Zoom for the initial stages of who will be a participant in our study. And one of the things we're looking for is this CAS? And they might come on Zoom and they might be able to say hi and, simple one-word responses to me, no problem. What's your favorite color? Blue, right? No problem. And I might be thinking, okay, they sound pretty good, right? Pretty clear. I'll start to think about these more complicated words like spaghetti, banana, avocado, ambulance, right? Or the stuff that's on the teapot. If you're not familiar with that, it's just multisyllabic words, but hard multisyllabic words. Butterfly, ambulance, hamburger, to name a few. Spaghetti's on there. And I will have them say those words. And I want to see or hear, listen, how are they producing those words? Do I then see a struggle? Do I then hear those characteristics, that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about CAS? So we don't want to write it off right away. And again, these are going to be your phrasal target kids, right? And to remember, you can have a really nice phrase and a really great multisyllabic word as a target for the same child. If we go back to, for those of you who were there when we talked about our strive, our planning for what our target words were, we want variability, right? That's one of the core principles of motor learning, right? We want that practice variability. So we would want to have a variety of different structures, right?
Which is a great point. So can you use that strive framework? Do you use that strive framework when a child is at this level, when we're at multisyllabic words and phrasal level?
Yes, because we have the same considerations.
Right.
Just to give you a funny one, I had a little girl, oh my gosh, loved her. She loved hedgehogs. I know it's very random, but she loved them so much and she could barely say them. I didn't even know what she was trying, and it fit perfectly within the scheme of what we wanted to work on. And that became one of her targets. Wow. Hedgehog. I got hedgehog stickers. It was great. And she had some other harder targets too, phrasal targets, but it's capitalizing on sort of meeting them at this point where what's important to them. And how can we get almost our biggest bang for our buck with the movement? High five is a good one. Or I had a little boy, his name was Lewis. He was a little bit older. I'm Lewis was one of his targets.
Right.
This was very, very hard.
I love those that can combine their names, right? Like, I love those kinds of phrases. I had one little girl who she had, to your point of like, look at connected speech, even some language subtests. She had kind of habituated this motor plan for referring to like her friends as, and she would not use particular pronouns like she and he. It's always her. So her going, her walking, and that was just easier for her to say. And so I thought, to your point too, on phrases like choose those grammatical morphemes, look at syntax. That's what we chose. We did like carrier phrases that we worked on. She's right. She's going. Exactly. She's here. She's coming over. Like those, just to kind of build up that motor plan, right? For she is, and it wasn't she is, because naturally, how would you say it? She's
right,
going.
We don't talk like that.
She is going, right? It's not robotic. Yeah. So just kind of, again, thinking through and looking, I think too, to your point, looking at those longer utterances from the terms, from a place of motor planning, rather than just purely language and language, like they're hand in hand, right? It's all hand in hand. So Absolutely. How can we help develop both at the same time?
Yes. And that's like, we're really excited to look at this more formally. But that's what you do. That's what you would do. And you would just meet the child where they are and try to come up with really great phrases and work on them through the hierarchy. So with that example with the little boy, when his target was I'm Lewis, I started our therapy sessions from day one saying, hi, I'm Nicole, right? Just like putting him into that social situation that he would be in when he would have to respond. Yeah. I'm Lewis, right? And in the very beginning, of course, we started with that simultaneous production, slow simultaneous, really working through this together, having him do it with me, but all the while in my head knowing we're going to get to a point where he will know when I say, I'm Nicole, he's going to respond, I'm Lewis. And that is when I'm going to be able to check the box of the spontaneous production. So in these instances, just as a way to sort of think about how are we doing these and how are we doing this and with DTTC, you sort of set it up from the beginning. This way, when you want to get it in spontaneous, they already know what you're talking about and they know what you're looking for, right? So I always tell the therapist, really think about that. When you're starting from day one, even though they don't have it at that point, this works. It's going to work. Mm-hmm. This conscious practice is going to work, and you're going to get to the point where you are sprinkling it or looking at it spontaneously, or that delayed imitation even. Right. So you want to be thinking about how can I set them up for success? For like maybe toys that they like to play with their games, put it in, take it out. My turn, your turn, let's go, right? Underneath, right? Like you want to be thinking about how you can be using this over and over and over again to the point where they have it spontaneously.
Yeah, I love it. Just think, and again, you can only do that if what you're targeting is really functional and meaningful. And like you said, it just takes time, building rapport, getting to know families. I always tell my parents too, I said, if you in the moment, you're like, oh man, this would be a great target, text me, email me. Absolutely. Like have a running list, keep it on notes in your phone. Even if you think it's way too hard, maybe we can chain it. Maybe we can simplify it. Maybe we can, think of some strategies to simplify that particular target.
Yeah, I'm all for that too. I always ask the parents to do the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. In the moment, text me, email me, write it down, bring me the list, because it's like they don't always remember, and sometimes that's just gold. Oh, like that's something because like kitchen cabinet would be a really good phrase too, but I don't think that's going to apply to a 5-year-old, right? Me and you, we might like to work on kitchen cabinet, but it's really wouldn't be an appropriate phrase for a child.
So like Totally. Like, for example, I did have one parent who it was kind of an emergency email, like, hey, she met a new friend and she can't say her friend's name. Can you help with that? Like, absolutely. So we helped with the friend's name, and let's put that in like, hi, her name was Blossom. Hi, Blossom. Come here, Blossom. Like, how can you kind of incorporate that? Like, even if Blossom, like, you get it easily, that's great. Now let's make it a longer utterance and target those specifically. But again, you only know that if you're getting to know your kids. And honestly, most of my kids who tend to be a little older, who are kind of at this level, I spend the first 5 minutes. We just talk. What'd you do? Yeah. Where'd you go? How was your week? What are you looking forward to? Then that's how you find out.
I think it's really underrated, that. And I think that it doesn't take that much. Like, something that I try to do is, I don't know if this sounds silly, but they're coming to your room and they're so vulnerable when they're working with you, and there has to be that trust element there. Mm-hmm. So I think about how critical that walk back to my room is. Once they leave their caregiver, before we actually enter my therapy space to actually do the work, we have this little moment of borrowed time. Maybe it's a minute, maybe it's 2, where I try to really think about making them feel good about themselves. And I'm very purposeful about this. So one thing I have done with some of my kids that have needed this is, I always have a water bottle. I'm always drinking water. The kitchen is on the way to my office. I may say, you know what? Do you think you can help me, get the water and put it in my water bottle? Maybe you could push the button for me. And that seems silly, but that little act of feeling important and feeling needed and feeling trusted goes such a long way. By the time we enter my room, they feel like they've been helpful. Mm-hmm. They feel like they've helped me, right? And I always try to think about, what can I do to make that transition easier so that when they come in, they're feeling more at ease or better about themselves. And talking about myself is another thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't lie. I may say, you look tired. You know what? I'm tired too. I barely slept last night. My dog woke me up because she had to go to the bathroom at 3 a.m. Like, I just might keep it real. Because kids are so smart. They can sense this. They smell it out on you, and then they will share with you. So these are like such little gestures, I think, that can happen that have such a profound impact on the way that they work with you. And again, this is not about motor speech therapy. This is about just being a good speech pathologist.
Yeah. You can say that literally about anything you're addressing with any particular child, right?
Yes.
And so I know we tend to I think sometimes too, SLPs, especially maybe if you're in a particular setting like this, time is valuable. We got to get right to work. Yeah. But that is part of the work, right? Like, setting the stage, helping them feel, like you said, you're kind of bringing them in on a little part of your life and making them feel important and helpful. That is a part of what we're going to be doing, and it helps set the stage for just, I think, their willingness to kind of be a part of, okay, now let's, get some of our speech practice done. And, you're bringing them in on, setting them up for success, in other words, I guess, just from almost a mental, emotional perspective. But also, it gets them, I want to hear about what interests you. Like, I had one kid, he was really struggling in this one particular class. He was, I think, maybe 11 or 12. And so I'm like, well, tell me about it. And he was telling me about, this, I'm having a hard time studying this. And we would talk about it. And I was interested in it. But guess what words presented themselves, or phrases presented themselves as he was telling me about that. And then I would literally, especially for my older kids, like, is that hard for you to say? Can we want to practice that, and ask for their input on it? And he was like, nah, I don't care about that one. But a few times he'd be like, yeah, I think I would. That's a tricky one for me. And so we totally, like, great, that's going down on my list. And so I think being flexible too, in terms of what are we targeting, right?
Yes. And I think, I'm just looking at Stacy's point right here. We don't I think what you're saying is, if this child has phonological patterns that they're still running, right, in their output, we're not ignoring that. We're not ignoring that. We're actually want to target it in the context of targeting their motor planning, right? And likewise, something I didn't say before was, if we're choosing to pick a longer phrasal target, we're going to want, and this goes back to strive, we're going to want to think about, if this is a harder, if this is a more complex target for them in terms of length and structure, then we're going to want to make the phonemes easier. Right? So we're constantly doing that challenge point sort of assessment, that like we referred like the Goldilocks, right? Trying to really figure out how can we target what we need to target, but have them be successful. Back to why I like banana, because those are easier, but and N are easier for the most part, phonemes. With that vowel, that's relatively easy, and it's really just CV, 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 but it is a more complex target than, let's say, I.
Well, let me ask you this then, to Stacy's point too.
Yeah.
And this is how I have kind of addressed it. Now, let me know if you would do something different, or if you would tweak what I'm doing. But in my handful of targets that I'm addressing, if this child also has phonological errors that are pretty consistent in nature, but they do have apraxia and they have all these other motor planning issues also going on, I tend to want to choose, like you said, maybe simpler words, less complex syllable structure, I guess, so that I can target those phonological types of errors with those words. And like, let's say, I don't know, like let's say like, really, like let's use the word like. If the child is gliding and they're saying like, but they're ready for like these longer utterance, I might take that word like, and that's one of our targets because it's a CVC, it's a simpler syllable structure. But as I target the word like, we're learning L, right? I'm not using minimal pairs or, the complexity, like I'm not using a phonological approach. I'm using DTTC, motor learning intervention, but I'm still targeting the gliding by targeting a couple of words maybe in my list that will address those specific phonological errors. That's what I tend to do.
Yes. I think it's perfect. I mean, what comes to mind for me is a little boy I worked with a while ago. He loved Minecraft. I just got this it just downloaded all to me. But anyway, he was 7, and we had some more complicated phrases for him, but he had a tendency to delete the final consonant. And he also didn't have that S. It was lateralized. It was slushy. It wasn't great. I went all in on 7. I didn't even say I'm 7, right? Because I really, now, I wound up getting it. I used cognitive reframing. We did all of it. We did all of it in the context of DTTC. And I wound up, it was important, and we got it. And what am I doing there? I'm pulling on all my tools from my proverbial SLP toolbox in the context of the framework of DTTC. And I think that's the other thing that we frequently see is, when you're working on these techniques, right, you don't lose who you are as a therapist, what has worked for you, right? What prompts have worked for you, what cueing and feedback has worked for you. It's almost like you find yourself in the framework. And that's when it becomes best practice for you. And that's sort of the dynamicness that's there to it, right? Like your DTTC session isn't going to look like mine because you're a different therapist.
Yeah.
Right.
And your relationship is different to that particular child. So true.
Yes. Yes.
I love it. Well, I don't see any, I'm looking for other questions. I don't see any questions. I have seen a few people say that this was really helpful. So I'm very glad about that. And I want to be mindful of your time, Nicole, because I know we're busy ladies.
Well, if anyone has any questions, you know how to reach us, and we're so happy to have these conversations, and I'm happy that this will live on, and look towards our space for more information coming up about phrasal targets and what this could look like. But it's just good to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and please follow NYU Motor Speech Lab. And I know you guys have been posting a lot about the STRIVE framework too, that we kind of touched on a little bit. We talked a lot about in our last live, which is saved on, I think, both of our feeds probably. I may go ahead and repost those and just save them to a highlight so that we can continue to save those and
I would
highlight.
love that. Yeah,
which would be great.
And if anyone has any further questions about STRIVE, like Amy, we want to make this information accessible, and we want to help. And we're putting it out there. We don't want to work in a silo. Like, we want to, especially me personally, I am a research clinician, but I am really a clinician at heart, working in research. So I find it really incredibly important to get this stuff out to you all who are out there working really hard, in a way that is tangible and you could start applying it immediately. So any questions you have, or anything else that pops into your mind, just reach out.
Absolutely. Thank you for being available to that. And I will save this on our feed. So if you missed it, it'll be saved and you guys can watch later. But we'll definitely do more lives in the future as soon as we get our calendars together. But thanks for joining today, Nicole. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Amy, again. Such a pleasure as always.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.